Betrayal always cuts deepest when it comes from family. You grow up trusting them, sharing secrets, believing that no matter what, they will protect and love you. But sometimes the knife doesn't come from a stranger. It comes from the very hand you once held in childhood. That's exactly what happened when I discovered that my own sister had done the unthinkable. She didn't just betray me. She betrayed my daughter, who had her entire future tied up in the savings we had worked so hard to build. My husband and I had saved for years, sacrificing luxuries and comforts, just to make sure our daughter would never have to worry about college debt. That fund wasn't just money. It was our daughter's dreams, her security, her chance at a better life. Then one morning it all unraveled. Numbers didn't add up. Balances were wrong. And what we uncovered left us speechless. My sister had stolen the entire college fund. Not for survival, not for a child in need, but for her reckless lover, a man with empty promises and a history of using people. The betrayal was bad enough, but the way she smiled and lied to my face, pretending to care, made it worse. I thought my daughter, at 12 years old, wouldn't understand the depth of this tragedy. But what none of us expected was that she would be the one to see the cracks in my sister's lies. With a sharp mind and the innocence of someone who believes in justice, she pieced together what grown adults couldn't. What happened next not only exposed my sister's deceit but turned the tables in a way no one could have predicted. And it all started with a simple observation my daughter made, one that changed everything. The morning began like any other. Sunlight slipped gently through the kitchen blinds, casting faint golden lines across the table where my daughter, Emily, sat with her cereal bowl. She was humming something under her breath, a tune from a cartoon she'd watched the night before, while I sipped coffee and skimmed through the day's emails. My husband, Mark, was rushing around, gathering papers for a meeting, the usual chaos of our mornings. Nothing about that day warned me that it would end with a discovery so sharp. It would cut through the very fabric of trust one had held in my family. After dropping Emily off at school, I logged into our bank account. It was a small ritual I had adopted over the years, a way to keep myself grounded and to reassure my anxious mind that we were on track for the one dream we held above all else, Emily's college fund. Mark and I had agreed long ago that while we couldn't give her the world, we could at least give her the freedom to choose her education without drowning in debt. We lived modestly, skipped vacations, drove an old car, and ate out only on special occasions, all so that account could grow safely. It had become more than numbers. It was our silent promise to Emily. But that morning, as I scrolled through the figures, something was wrong. My breath caught in my throat. The balance was not what it should have been. It wasn't a small error either. Thousands of dollars were gone. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of glitch or bank mistake. My fingers trembled as I refreshed the page again and again, but the truth stayed put, cruel and undeniable. Nearly half of Emily's college savings had vanished in the span of just a few weeks. My chest tightened, my pulse quickening with panic. I immediately called the bank, my voice shaking as I asked the representative to explain the withdrawals. He listed dates and amounts. Large, unusual sums transferred electronically. My mind spun. Neither Mark nor I had authorized any of it. Then the representative mentioned something that turned my panic into disbelief. The transfers had been approved using the secondary access I had set up years ago for emergencies, the one I had shared only with my sister Sarah. Froze. My sister. My own flesh and blood. It felt like the world tilted beneath me. Sarah had been through difficult times before. Bad relationships, unstable jobs, debts she rarely admitted to. But I had always been there for her, covering bills when she fell short, offering her a place at our table, trusting her with my home, and even years ago, sharing access to the account in case something happened to me or Mark. I never imagined she would take advantage of it. For hours, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bank statement in front of me. Memories flooded back. Sarah laughing beside me during childhood sleepovers, her arms around me on my wedding day. Her voice promising she'd always look out for Emily like she was her own. How could that same sister betray me in a way so cruel and calculated? It wasn't just theft. It was theft from her niece, a child who adored her. When Mark came home that evening, I showed him everything. He was furious, his jaw tight as he paced the living room. "We're going to confront her," he said flatly. But my hand shook at the thought. I didn't want to believe it, not without giving her a chance to explain. Maybe there was some mistake, some reason I hadn't considered. The next day, I asked Sarah to come over. She arrived with her usual bright smile, carrying a bag of pastries as though it were just another casual visit. My heart hammered as I led her to the living room. Emily, sensing the tension, stayed in her room, the faint sound of her laughter drifting down the hallway as she played with her dolls. For a moment, I envied her innocence. "Sarah," I began, my voice unsteady, "there's money missing from Emily's college fund." I watched her carefully, hoping to see confusion, shock, or even concern. But instead, her smile faltered only for a second before she forced it back into place. "What do you mean?" she asked lightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I slid the printed bank statements across the table. "These transfers came from the account. Using your access." Her eyes flicked over the papers, and I caught the briefest shadow of recognition in them. But she recovered quickly. "There must be some mistake. I would never take Emily's money." The lie stung more than the theft. I could see it in the way her fingers gripped the papers too tightly, in the way her eyes avoided mine. Still, I wanted to believe her, wanted so badly to cling to the sister I thought I knew. "Sarah," I whispered, almost pleading, "tell me the truth, please." But she only shook her head, her tone smooth, almost rehearsed. "I don't know what happened, but I promise you, it wasn't me." She left soon after, leaving the pastries untouched on the counter. I stood in the doorway watching her walk away, my stomach in knots. Mark was livid when I told him how she denied everything, but I was left with something worse than anger. I was drowning in heartbreak. That night, after we tucked Emily into bed, I sat beside her, brushing her hair away from her forehead as she drifted to sleep. She stirred and mumbled, "I love you, Mom," before slipping back into dreams. Tears burned in my eyes. She had no idea what storm was brewing around her, how close her future had come to being stolen by someone she trusted to braid her hair and buy her ice cream. Lying awake in the dark, I realized this was only the beginning. The money was gone, but the bigger battle was still ahead. The battle of uncovering the truth, protecting Emily, and facing the devastating reality that sometimes the ones who smile the brightest are the ones who hide the deepest betrayal. And in that moment, I had no idea that my 12-year-old daughter, with her sharp eyes and quiet observations, would soon notice what the adults had missed, and change the course of everything that followed. The days after confronting Sarah felt like walking through a fog I couldn't escape. Everything looked normal on the outside. School runs, dinners, laundry piling up on the couch, but underneath, every moment carried the weight of betrayal. I caught myself replaying our conversation again and again, searching her words for honesty, for some clue that I had misunderstood. But no matter how many times I turned it over in my mind, the truth was sharp and clear. My sister had taken Emily's future and tried to bury it beneath a smile. Mark was less forgiving. He stopped mentioning Sarah's name altogether, as if erasing her could erase the wound. He worked longer hours, his anger simmering under the surface. At night, he lay awake beside me, sighing heavily, sometimes muttering things like, "She'll pay for this," or, "How could she do this to a child?" His anger was a fire, mine was a slow bleed. I wanted to protect Emily, to shield her from the storm, but children always sense more than you think. Started with small questions. One afternoon, as Emily sat at the kitchen table drawing, she asked, "Mom, why did you look so sad when Aunt Sarah left the other day?" I froze, caught between the instinct to protect her and the fear of lying. "Grown-up problems," I whispered, kissing the top of her head. But she frowned at that answer, her pencil pausing mid-line. 12, she was no longer a baby. She could read the shifts in our home, the tightness in my voice, the way Mark avoided talking when Sarah's name came up. That evening, as I washed dishes, I overheard her in the living room. She was on the phone with Sarah, giggling, her voice bright. "Thanks, Aunt Sarah. I love it," she said, probably talking about some small gift. I felt a knot twist inside me. How could I tell her that the aunt she adored had stolen from her? How do you explain to a child that family isn't always safe? It wasn't until later that week that Emily's sharpness revealed itself. She came into my room while I was folding laundry, holding up a necklace Sarah had given her, a silver chain with a little heart pendant. "Isn't it pretty, Mom?" she asked, smiling. I forced myself to nod, even though the sight of it made my stomach clench. Aunt Sarah said she bought it last year, but the receipt in her purse said last week. Her words were innocent, almost casual, but my head snapped up so quickly she blinked in surprise. "What did you say, sweetheart?" "The receipt," Emily repeated. When she was looking for her phone, I saw it in her purse. It had the same necklace on it, and it was from last week. She said she got it a long time ago, but that's not true. She shrugged and went back to twirling the pendant in her fingers, unaware of the electricity that surged through me at her observation. That night, when Mark came home, I told him what Emily had said. His eyes darkened. "She's lying to a child now. God, how low can she go?" he muttered, pacing the room. But then Emily appeared in the doorway, hugging her stuffed bear, her eyes wide and serious. "Why are you mad at Aunt Sarah?" she asked softly. I hesitated, but Mark crouched to her level, his voice firm but gentle. "Because she took something that wasn't hers. Something very important." Emily's brows furrowed. "The college money." The air in the room froze. We hadn't told her directly, but somehow she had pieced it together. Children always do. "Yes," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "She took it, Emmy. And she lied about it." Emily hugged her bear tighter, her face shifting from confusion to determination. "Then we have to catch her," she said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. From that day on, Emily became sharper, more observant. She asked questions during phone calls, listened closely when Sarah visited, and jotted notes in her little journal. At first, I thought it was just a game to her, but soon I realized she was connecting dots I hadn't even noticed. She pointed out how Sarah suddenly had a new handbag, how she mentioned going to restaurants she couldn't possibly afford, how she slipped up about dates when telling stories. One evening, while Sarah was over for dinner, Emily leaned close to me and whispered. She said she hasn't seen her boyfriend in a month, but she had a voicemail from him yesterday. I heard it when her phone rang in the kitchen. My daughter's eyes were wide, her voice low, but there was no mistaking the pride in her tone. She was solving a puzzle, and piece by piece, she was uncovering the truth. After Sarah left that night, Emily brought me her journal. Pages filled with scribbles, dates, and small details only a child's sharp memory could hold on to. "See, Mom," she said, flipping through the notes. "She says one thing, but then she says another thing later. It doesn't match." Mark sat beside me, stunned. "She's been lying to us the whole time," he said slowly, looking at the evidence our 12-year-old had gathered. "And Emily just proved it." I hugged my daughter tightly, both proud and heartbroken. Proud of her courage, her intelligence, her determination to defend what was hers. Heartbroken because she shouldn't have had to carry this burden. She should have been playing with dolls, not catching her aunt in lies. But life had forced her to grow sharper, faster. As I tucked Emily into bed that night, she whispered, "Mom, don't be sad. We're going to fix it. I promise." Her innocence wrapped around those words, but there was also steel in her voice, a determination I hadn't expected from a child. And lying awake later, I realized she was right. With her observations, with the truth laid bare in her little notebook, we had a weapon stronger than anger. We had proof. Sarah thought she could outsmart us, but she had underestimated Emily. What my sister didn't know was that her greatest betrayer wouldn't be me or Mark. It would be the 12-year-old girl she had stolen from. That night, for the first time since discovering the missing money, I felt a spark of hope. My daughter had turned the tables. Sarah thought she had us fooled, but she had no idea what storm was coming for her. The tension in our home built like a storm pressing against the windows, heavy and waiting to break. Every time Sarah came around, the air shifted. Mark avoided her altogether. His jaw locked tight and his words clipped whenever she entered the room. I tried to keep my composure, but anger and sorrow tangled inside me until my hands shook whenever she spoke. Emily, though, sat quietly in the corner, her little journal hidden in her lap, her sharp eyes tracking every detail. She was patient, waiting, storing away every inconsistency. My 12-year-old had turned into a detective, and although I should have been proud, I hated that she was forced into this role at all. Children shouldn't need to prove the betrayal of adults. One evening after dinner, Emily pulled me aside. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "Mom, I think I have enough now," she whispered, clutching her journal to her chest. She opened it carefully, flipping through pages of notes, dates, receipts she had found tucked away, little overheard snippets of Sarah's conversations. "See here. Aunt Sarah said she couldn't afford rent last month, but then she had that new bag. And here, she told you she didn't see her boyfriend in weeks, but I heard his voicemail yesterday. And this," she pointed to a scribbled note, "the necklace. She said she bought it a long time ago, but I saw the receipt. She's lying. She's lying about everything." I stared at the pages, my throat tight. She was right. Emily had built something undeniable, something even a lawyer couldn't ignore. I hugged her tightly, my heart breaking and swelling all at once. "You've done so well, Emmy," I whispered, stroking her hair. "But this isn't your burden. It's not fair you had to do this." She pulled back, her small face fierce. "It's my money, Mom. My future. I don't want her to take it away." That night, Mark and I pored over Emily's notes. Together with the bank statements and the odd charges that didn't belong to us, the picture became clear. Sarah had drained the account and funneled the money into her own reckless life with her lover, buying luxuries and feeding his empty promises. It was no longer just suspicion, it was proof. The question now was how to confront her without letting her wriggle free again. Mark wanted to call her immediately, to corner her with everything. "We'll sit her down, lay it all out. She won't be able to deny it this time," he said, his voice vibrating with controlled rage. But I hesitated. I knew my sister. Sarah had always been a skilled liar, slipping words around like silk, twisting guilt until you questioned yourself. If we went in unprepared, she'd find a way to deflect. No, we had to let her reveal herself. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Sarah invited herself over the next weekend, breezing through the door with that too bright smile, her perfume heavy in the air. "I thought I'd bring cupcakes for Emily," she chirped, setting a box on the counter as though nothing were wrong. My stomach turned at her cheerfulness. How could she look at my daughter, the very child she had stolen from, and smile like that? Emily lingered in the kitchen, quiet but watchful, her journal tucked under her arm. Mark sat at the table, his eyes fixed on Sarah like a hawk. I forced my voice to stay steady as I poured coffee. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said finally. She blinked, her smile faltering for just a moment. "About what?" I placed the bank statements on the table, followed by Emily's careful notes. "About this." Her face changed. Not much, just a flicker of unease before she laughed lightly. "Oh, come on. Are we still on this? I told you I didn't take anything. But this time we were ready." Emily stepped forward, her small hands shaking as she opened her journal. "Aunt Sarah," she said softly, "you said you bought this necklace last year, but the receipt said last week. I saw it. And you said you didn't see your boyfriend, but I heard his voicemail. And you said you couldn't afford rent, but then you had a new bag. That doesn't make sense." Her words hung in the air like arrows. Sarah froze, her eyes darting to me, then to Mark, then back to Emily. For once, she had no quick reply. "Emily," she began slowly, her voice straining to stay calm. "Sometimes adults have complicated reasons for things." But Emily didn't flinch. "The complicated reason is that you took my money," she said simply, her voice trembling but clear. Silence filled the room. Mark's fists clenched on the table. My heart raced, torn between rage and grief. Sarah's mask cracked then, the polished smile slipping away, her eyes narrowing. "You're really going to believe a child over me?" she snapped, her voice sharp now. Yes, I said, my own voice finally finding its strength. Because that child has shown more honesty in 12 years than you have in your entire life. Sarah's face twisted, anger and shame fighting in her expression. Fine, she spat, pushing the papers away. Yes, I took it. I didn't have a choice. He needed me. He promised. Her voice broke, but there was no regret in her tone, only desperation. You don't understand what it's like to love someone who needs you. Mark stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. What about your niece? He thundered. What about the little girl who looked up to you? You stole her future to feed some loser's lies. Sarah's eyes flickered to Emily, who stood small but unyielding, her journal clutched to her chest like armor. For a moment, I thought I saw a crack of guilt in my sister's face, but it passed quickly, swallowed by pride and defensiveness. I'll pay it back, she muttered, avoiding my gaze. Eventually. Eventually doesn't fix this, I said coldly. You've already destroyed something we can't get back. The trust, the bond, the family we thought we had. She gathered her purse and stormed toward the door, muttering about betrayal and family turning against her. But this time the lies didn't land. We had the truth, laid bare by the youngest among us. When the door slammed shut, the house felt hollow, heavy with the echo of everything broken. I sat down, burying my face in my hands. Emily climbed onto the chair beside me, her small hand resting on my arm. It's okay, Mom, she whispered. We know the truth now. That means we can fix it. I hugged her close, tears spilling freely. She was right. The truth was painful, but it was also freeing. Sarah could no longer hide behind smiles and excuses. The mask had shattered. And though the road ahead would be hard, recovering the money, deciding whether to press charges, we were no longer blind. What Sarah hadn't counted on was that her betrayal wouldn't be exposed by me or Mark, but by the very child she thought was too young to understand. Emily had turned her innocence into strength, her sharp eyes cutting through deception. And as I held her that night, I realized something else. Sarah might have stolen the money, but Emily had reclaimed her power. The house felt colder after Sarah stormed out, as though the very walls had absorbed the weight of her betrayal. I sat at the kitchen table long after she left, staring at the untouched cupcakes she had brought, their pastel frosting now symbols of her empty gestures. Mark paced back and forth, his fists clenching, his voice breaking through the silence. She admitted it. She admitted it, and still she doesn't feel guilty. His words were sharp, but I could hear the hurt buried beneath them. This wasn't just about money. It was about family, trust, and the shattering realization that the person we once leaned on had been hollow all along. Emily sat quietly nearby, her journal resting on her lap. She didn't cry. Instead, she watched us with those steady eyes that had already seen too much. So what happens now? She asked softly, her voice almost too small for the room. The question pierced me because it was the same one screaming inside my own head. What happens now? Do we confront Sarah again? Do we try to recover the money quietly? Or do we take the unthinkable step of dragging family into court? Mark stopped pacing, his jaw tightening. We call the police, he said flatly. We can't just let this go. She stole from her own niece. She has to face consequences. His words echoed with finality, but my heart twisted. Calling the police on my own sister felt like crossing a line we could never come back from. Once we involved the law, Sarah would no longer just be a wayward sibling. She would be a criminal. I wanted to protest, to find another way, but Emily surprised me. She took it from me, she said firmly, her voice stronger than before. If we don't do something, she'll just keep lying. She'll keep hurting us. Her small hands tightened around her journal. You always tell me actions have consequences, Mom. Shouldn't Aunt Sarah have them too? Her words, spoken with such childlike honesty, cut through the haze of doubt. She was right. If we ignored this, what message would we send her? That some people are allowed to hurt others without being held accountable, just because they're family. The following day, Mark and I sat down with a lawyer. The sterile office smelled faintly of coffee and leather, its neat shelves filled with binders of other people's broken promises. We laid out the bank statements, the receipts, and Emily's meticulous notes. The lawyer, a stern woman with sharp glasses, listened carefully before leaning back in her chair. "You have a solid case," she said. "Family or not, theft is theft. If you pursue this, she could be ordered to repay what she can and face charges for fraud." Hearing it aloud made my stomach churn. My sister facing fraud charges. My parents, who adored her, would never forgive me. The rift in the family would be permanent. But then I thought of Emily, sitting at home, believing in us to protect her. Believing that justice mattered. That belief was worth more than family approval. When we told Emily that evening, she nodded solemnly. "Good," she said simply, as though she had already decided this path before we had. Then she added, "Can I come when you talk to them? I want them to know I'm not scared." My throat tightened at her bravery. She was only 12, yet she carried herself like someone much older, determined not to let her aunt's betrayal make her feel small. The weeks that followed were heavy. Papers were filed, statements made, and the police contacted Sarah. When she realized how serious things had become, her facade cracked in new ways. She called me at odd hours, her voice frantic, begging me to drop everything. "Please," she sobbed into the phone one night. "You don't understand. I only did it because he needed me. He promised we'd run away together. He said he'd pay it back." Her words dripped with desperation, but all I could hear was the echo of Emily's voice. Actions have consequences. I wanted to remind Sarah that the money wasn't mine to forgive. It belonged to a 12-year-old girl who had worked harder at uncovering the truth than any adult should have had to. But I didn't. Instead, I told her, "I can't protect you from this. You did this, Sarah. You have to face it." Then I hung up, my hands trembling. The case moved forward slowly, as cases often do, but each step felt like a chisel carving away at what remained of our family. My parents called me in tears, accusing me of cruelty, of betrayal, of choosing money over blood. "She's your sister," my mother pleaded. "You can't do this to her." I wanted to scream that Sarah had already done it to us, that she had chosen lies and selfishness over her niece. But I stayed quiet, because nothing I said would change their blind love for her. Through it all, Emily stood tall. She never wavered, even when relatives whispered that we were tearing the family apart. One evening, after another exhausting phone call with my mother, I sat on the edge of Emily's bed, tears spilling down my cheeks. She reached out, holding my hand. "It's okay, Mom," she said softly. "They don't have to understand. We do. And that's enough." Her words soothed me more than anything else could. My daughter had become my anchor, reminding me that truth mattered, even when it was painful. Eventually, the day came when Sarah had to face the investigators. She looked smaller then, her bravado gone, her shoulders hunched. She tried once more to meet my eyes, to pull me into her story, but I stayed firm. Emily sat beside me, her journal closed in her lap, her presence steady and calm. She didn't need to say anything. Her very silence was powerful. Sarah avoided looking at her. Perhaps it was easier not to face the child she had stolen from. When it was over, when the paperwork was signed and Sarah was let out, Emily reached for my hand. "See, Mom," she whispered. "We're fixing it." And for the first time in months I felt like she was right. The money might never fully come back, the scars might never fade, but we had done the one thing that mattered. We had stood up together and refused to let betrayal win. That night, as I tucked Emily into bed, she asked, "Do you think she'll ever say sorry?" I paused, brushing her hair from her face. "Maybe," I said softly. "But even if she doesn't, we don't need her sorry to move on. We have each other." Emily smiled sleepily, her eyes drifting closed. And as I sat there in the quiet, I realized she had taught me something I had forgotten in the mess of anger and grief. That family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who stand beside you when the storm hits, the ones who refuse to let you drown. Sarah had betrayed us, But Emily had reminded us of our strength. And in that truth, we were already beginning to heal. The months that followed were both exhausting and strangely liberating. Once the case had moved into the courts, there was little more for us to do but wait. The days passed slowly, each one layered with tension, but also with the smallest fragments of peace returning to our home. The truth had been dragged into the open, and with it, a sense of control that had been missing since the morning I first saw the bank statement. No more lies. No more guessing games. Sarah could no longer twist the story in her favor. For the first time in a long while I felt like we were breathing again. Mark poured his energy into work, maybe as a way to stop himself from thinking too much, and I tried to return life to something like normal. Emily, however, was different. She didn't slip back into childhood as I secretly hoped she might. Instead, she carried herself with a kind of quiet strength, her journal always nearby, her eyes watchful but not heavy with the same sadness I carried. She wasn't broken by what had happened, she was sharpened by it. Sometimes, late at night, I would watch her sleeping and ache for the innocence she had lost, but then I'd remember the steel in her voice when she said, "Actions have consequences," and I'd realize she hadn't lost herself at all. She had found her voice. When the trial date finally came, we sat together in the courtroom, the air thick with the whispers of strangers. Sarah walked in looking diminished, her hair pulled back too tightly, her eyes darting everywhere but toward us. I braced myself for anger to rise, for grief to choke me, but what I felt instead was an unexpected calm. She was no longer the sister who laughed with me under the stars as children. She was a stranger wearing her face. And strangers had no power to break me anymore. Emily sat between Mark and me, her small hand wrapped tightly in mine. She didn't speak much, but her presence was a steady reminder of why we were here. When the evidence was presented, our statements, the bank records, even Emily's carefully documented notes, I saw Sarah's shoulders slump lower and lower. There was no escape now, no story she could spin to erase the truth. Her lawyer tried to paint the picture of a desperate woman, manipulated by a cruel lover, trapped in circumstances beyond her control. And maybe part of that was true. But the fact remained. She had chosen to take from her niece, to rob a child of her future. When the judge read out the decision, guilty of theft and fraud, restitution ordered where possible, Sarah didn't look surprised. She didn't look at me or at Emily. She just stared at the table in front of her, hollow and small. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Not because justice had been served in some perfect, tidy way. The money was mostly gone, and no legal ruling could rebuild the trust that had been shattered, but because we had faced the storm head-on and refused to bow to it. We hadn't let silence or guilt bury the truth. Life after the trial was quieter. Sarah disappeared from our lives. And though relatives continued to call, some angry, some begging for reconciliation, I found myself less shaken by their words. For so long I had carried the guilt of turning my sister in, but slowly, I began to understand something Emily had known from the start. Protecting your child is not betrayal, it is love. One evening, months later, Emily and I sat on the back porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. She was taller now, her face more defined, her presence steadier. "Do you think she hates us?" she asked suddenly, her voice gentle but curious. I took a deep breath. "Maybe," I admitted. "But that's not our burden to carry. What matters is that we did what was right, even when it was hard." She nodded thoughtfully, then leaned her head against my shoulder. "I don't hate her," she said softly. "I just don't trust her anymore. And that's okay, right?" Tears filled my eyes. But this time they weren't from sorrow. "That's more than okay, Emmy. That's wisdom. You don't have to hate to move on. You just have to protect yourself." As the days turned into weeks, I noticed something remarkable. Emily's ordeal had given her not only resilience but also compassion. She began helping classmates who were struggling, standing up for friends who felt small, speaking truths others were afraid to say. She hadn't let betrayal make her bitter. She had let it make her brave. Mark and I worked harder than ever to rebuild Emily's college fund. Every paycheck, every bonus, Every bit of extra income was carefully tucked away again. It would take years to recover what was lost, but we no longer saw it as just money. It was a symbol, a quiet promise renewed. And this time no one would touch it. On Emily's 13th birthday, as she blew out the candles on her cake, I watched her surrounded by laughter, by friends who adored her, by a family that had endured the unthinkable and come out stronger. In that moment, I realized the truth of it all. Sarah had tried to steal my daughter's future, but she had failed. Because the real treasure Emily carried wasn't in a bank account. It was in her mind, her courage, her unshakable belief in justice. Years from now, when Emily would finally step into her college dorm, I knew she wouldn't just be carrying books and dreams. She would be carrying the story of how, at 12 years old, she had stood taller than the lies of an adult, how she had outsmarted betrayal and reminded us all that truth is worth fighting for. As for Sarah, I don't know where her path will lead. Maybe she'll find redemption. Maybe she won't. But her choices are hers alone. I no longer lose sleep over them. I no longer ache with questions of why. Because in the end, her betrayal didn't define us. It revealed us. It showed me the strength of my husband, the resilience of my daughter, and even my own ability to stand firm when everything inside me wanted to crumble. That night, as I tucked Emily into bed, she whispered, "Mom, do you think everything will be okay now?" I smiled, brushing her hair back and kissing her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. Because no matter what happens, we have each other. And that's more powerful than anything anyone could ever take from us. And for the first time since the nightmare began, I truly believed it. Sparkles, if this story shook you, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Sparkles, subscribe to Twisted Fate Chronicle for more jaw-dropping twists and powerful life stories.